My name is Maud, and I worked in the marketing department at Carson and Associates. That's where I met Jack. He worked in sales just down the hall from my office. It all started in a simple, innocent way. We kept running into each other in the office kitchen during lunch breaks. I'd be heating up my boring microwave meals, while he'd pull out these neatly packed bento boxes filled with colorful food. "Those look way better than my frozen dinners," I said one day, eyeing his lunch. He grinned and held out an extra pair of chopsticks. "Want to try?" My mom taught me how to cook, but I think she regrets it now. I stopped calling her for recipes pretty quickly. That small moment led to more shared lunches. Soon, it became our daily routine. We'd sit at the little table by the window, sharing stories about our lives. I told him about growing up with my practical, no-nonsense parents in the suburbs and how my grandma had given me my apartment before she passed away. Jack shared bits about his work, hobbies, and dreams. But he rarely mentioned his family. After 4 months of these lunch dates, he finally asked me out for a proper dinner. "Let's go somewhere tonight. Somewhere that doesn't involve a microwave or plastic cutlery," he said with a playful smile. I said yes, and that's how our real story began. We dated for a year, and it was amazing. Jack was funny, thoughtful, and kind. When he suggested we move in together, it felt like the most natural thing to do. My apartment was spacious, and we were spending most nights together anyway. Everything was perfect, except for one thing. I'd never met his family. He'd met mine just a few months after we started dating. But every time I brought up meeting his family, Jack would dodge the question or give vague excuses. One evening, after we'd been living together for a few months, I couldn't keep quiet about it anymore. We were curled up on the couch, watching a movie. I paused it and turned to face him. "Jack, why haven't I met your family yet? Are you ashamed of me or something?" He let out a long sigh and ran his hands through his dark hair. "God, no, Britt," he said, his voice soft but heavy. "I'm not ashamed of you," Jack said quietly. "I'm ashamed of them." I laughed, thinking he was joking. "Come on, they can't be that bad." "They are," he said, his voice completely serious. "They're different. They think everything is a joke. And I mean everything. Even serious situations, important moments, they turn it all into some cruel prank." I raised my eyebrows, still unsure if he was messing with me. "What do you mean? Like what kind of pranks? You want examples?" "Fine." He sat up straighter, his jaw tightening. "When I was in high school, I brought my first girlfriend over for dinner. My mom served spaghetti, but she replaced the noodles with rubber worms. My girlfriend screamed, threw up at the table, and ran out. Everyone thought it was hilarious, except me and her. She never talked to me again." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. But there wasn't one. "Or how about this?" he continued, his voice bitter. "I had a big presentation in middle school, something I worked really hard on. My brother swapped my notebook with one that looked identical, but it was filled with pornographic drawings. I didn't notice until I opened it in front of the entire class. I got suspended for 3 weeks." He shook his head, and I could see the anger in his eyes as he kept sharing more stories. Each one was worse than the last. By the time he finished, I understood why he was so reluctant to introduce me to his family. But nothing could have prepared me for what was coming. Jack proposed to me on a quiet Thursday morning. It wasn't anything fancy, just the two of us in the kitchen making breakfast. I was flipping pancakes when he pulled out a ring and said, "I can't imagine my life without you, Britt. Will you marry me?" Of course, I said yes. I was over the moon. But then, he said the words I'd been dreading. "I guess it's time for you to meet my family." The Taylor family home was a charming 2-story colonial in the suburbs. It looked warm and inviting, with flowers blooming along the walkway. Mrs. Taylor opened the door before we even made it to the porch. She was a petite woman with Jack's warm brown eyes and a wide smile. Behind her stood Mr. Taylor, tall and serious-looking, and next to him was Etienne, Jack's older brother. "Oh, finally," Mrs. Taylor exclaimed, pulling me into a tight hug. "We've been dying to meet the woman who stole Jack's heart." Their warmth caught me off guard. The initial conversation was surprisingly normal. We sat in their cozy living room, chatting about my job, my family, and how Jack and I met. They even made a few lighthearted jokes that actually made me laugh. I started to relax, thinking maybe Jack had exaggerated about their pranks. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. I noticed Jack watching his family, like someone waiting for a disaster to happen. He looked tense, but I thought he was just being overly cautious. "I'll get us some tea," Mrs. Taylor said cheerfully. "Maud dear, how do you take yours?" "Just a splash of milk, please," I replied with a smile. She came back with the tea tray, and everyone continued chatting pleasantly. I took a big sip of my tea, and immediately regretted it. My mouth felt like it had been hit with fire. The tea was loaded with salt and pepper, so much that it burned my throat. I spat it back into the cup, coughing uncontrollably as tears streamed down my face. The Taylors burst out laughing. "Welcome to the family," Etienne shouted, grinning. "Better get used to it," Mr. Taylor added, wiping away tears of laughter. "This is how we show love here. We like our little jokes." I couldn't take it. I ran to the kitchen, desperate for water. I found a glass, filled it with ice water, and gulped it down, trying to cool the burning in my throat. My nose was running, my makeup was ruined, and I could feel tears streaking down my cheeks. From the living room, I heard Jack whisper angrily, "What is wrong with you people? This isn't funny. She's going to be my wife." "Oh, lighten up," Etienne replied casually. "It's just a joke." When I walked back into the living room, my face a mess of running mascara and smudged foundation, they took one look at me and started laughing again. "Look, she looks like a panda," Etienne said, pointing at me and doubling over with laughter. That was it. Jack jumped to his feet, his face red with anger. "You're all jerks," he shouted. "This is exactly why I didn't want to bring her here." He grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the door. In the car, Jack kept apologizing over and over. I just hugged him, my face still burning from the pepper and the humiliation. As we drove home, I realized Jack hadn't been exaggerating about his family at all. He'd been warning me. Planning a wedding is stressful enough without worrying about your future in-laws turning it into a circus of practical jokes. For weeks, Jack and I debated whether to invite his family to the wedding at all. "We have to invite them," Jack finally said one night while we were addressing invitations. "They're still my parents, and no matter how much I hate their pranks, I'd regret not having them there," Jack said, his voice heavy. The next day, he called them, putting the phone on speaker, so I could hear. "Mom, Dad, listen carefully," he said firmly. "You can come to the wedding, but I need your word, no pranks. This is the most important day of our lives, not some kind of circus." "Of course, sweetheart," his mom chirped. "We'll behave, I promise." The wedding day started perfectly. The ceremony was beautiful, and the reception was going smoothly. Jack's family was actually behaving themselves, though I noticed Jack keeping a close eye on them. Then it was time to cut the cake. Our cake was stunning, 4 tiers of white fondant, with delicate sugar flowers cascading down the sides. But as we approached it, something felt off. There were candles on the cake, lit candles. That wasn't part of the plan. I turned to Jack to say something, but before I could, there was a loud pop. Then another and another. The cake exploded. Chunks of cake and frosting flew everywhere, most of it landing on me and completely ruining my wedding dress. For a moment, there was total silence. Then I heard it, the familiar sound of the Taylors' laughter. They were doubled over, pointing and gasping for air. "Your face," Etienne managed to say between fits of laughter. "Oh my God, your face." I stood there, cake dripping from my dress, and burst into tears. Through my blurred vision, I saw Jack's face turn a deep shade of purple. He looked furious. "Get out," he roared at his family. "Get out of my wedding right now." "You're overreacting," his mom said, looking confused. "Everyone loves a good wedding prank." Jack didn't even respond. He waved over the security team we'd hired, thank goodness for that decision, and had them escort his family out of the venue. My mom rushed over with napkins, trying to wipe the frosting off my face. My bridesmaids surrounded me protectively, their faces full of concern. Even Jack's Aunt Lori, who I had just met that day, came over to help, shooting disgusted looks at her departing relatives. "I can't believe they're my brother's family," Aunt Lori muttered as she helped me wipe cake from my hair. "This is a wedding, for heaven's sake, not some college frat party." Somehow, we managed to salvage the rest of the reception. Our friends and my family rallied around us, turning the situation into a group joke rather than leaving me as the target. Someone even found a backup cake. Apparently, our wedding planner had dealt with difficult families before. After I changed into my backup dress, we managed to take a few decent pictures and enjoyed the rest of the night. Life calmed down after the wedding disaster. Jack and I settled into a peaceful routine in my grandmother's old apartment, far away from his family's chaos. We turned the spare bedroom into a home office, planning to use it that way for a while before maybe turning it into a nursery. But plans have a way of changing. Just over a year after the wedding, I found out I was pregnant. When I told Jack, he was over the moon, spinning me around our tiny kitchen, though he quickly set me down when I started feeling queasy. We decided to keep the news to ourselves for the first few months, telling only my parents. But somehow word got out. When I was 8 months along, Jack's phone rang one evening. I recognized the look on his face immediately. "Your mom's?" I asked. He nodded. "They know about the baby. Mom's insisting they have a right to meet their grandchild." I instinctively placed my hands over my growing belly. "No pranks around the baby," I said firmly. "Absolutely none," Jack agreed before answering the call. When Audrey was born, she was perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, and Jack's warm brown eyes. For the first 3 months, we managed to keep the Taylors away, but their persistence eventually wore us down. Just one visit, Jack finally agreed. At our apartment, where we can control everything. And if there's even a hint of a prank, they're out forever. They came on a Saturday afternoon. I watched the Taylors closely during their visit, expecting some sort of prank as they cooed over Audrey. But to my surprise, they were on their best behavior. Mrs. Taylor held Audrey carefully, tears in her eyes, while Mr. Taylor proudly shared old photos of his father holding baby Jack. That visit led to more. They started coming over every few weeks, bringing thoughtful gifts and acting like normal grandparents. But I never fully let my guard down. I politely declined every dinner invitation, still haunted by memories of the pepper tea incident. During one of their visits, while Jack was changing Audrey's diaper, Mrs. Taylor casually mentioned Etienne. "Oh, he got married last month," she said as if it were no big deal. "Just a small ceremony at the courthouse." His Caroline refused to have a proper wedding. She shook her head disapprovingly. "I don't understand why." I bit my tongue to keep from saying, "Really? You don't understand why?" Instead, I just nodded, thinking about my own ruined wedding dress and that exploding cake. I had a pretty good idea why Caroline had chosen a courthouse ceremony. Honestly, I wished I had done the same. In my mind, I could picture exactly how that conversation went between Etienne and Caroline. She had probably heard stories about my wedding, or maybe she'd experienced some of their harmless pranks herself. Either way, she was smart. She'd found a way to avoid giving them any opportunity to ruin her day. Life has a way of falling apart when you least expect it. One rainy Thursday morning, Jack kissed Audrey goodbye before school, kissed me goodbye before work, and walked out the door. I didn't know it would be the last time I'd see him. At 10:10 a.m., a drunk driver ran a red light. By 10:35 a.m., I was a widow. Audrey didn't understand at first. She was only 8, too young to grasp the meaning of never coming back. When I told her that Daddy had died, she looked up at me and asked if he'd be home for dinner. Every time she asked, my heart shattered all over again. The days leading up to the funeral passed in a haze. My mother practically moved in, handling all the arrangements while I sat on the couch in a daze, holding Audrey close. I couldn't cry anymore. I felt empty, like someone had scooped out everything inside me. At the funeral, the Taylors came with Etienne and his wife, Caroline. I barely noticed them until it was time for the eulogies. I had already spoken, sharing memories of Jack as a husband and father. I talked about his kindness, his quiet humor, and how he had just taught Audrey to ride her bike last month. Then his parents stood up to speak. Jack always loved a good joke, Mr. Taylor began, and my stomach tightened. Remember when he was 5, and we convinced him his teddy bear had come alive and eaten all his Halloween candy? Mrs. Taylor added with a laugh. And that time in college, Mr. Taylor said, chuckling, when we sent him a fake acceptance letter to medical school, even though he never applied. His face was priceless. The church was silent. No one laughed. I looked around and saw people's faces twisted in disbelief and secondhand embarrassment. Audrey clutched my hand tightly, her small fingers trembling. And now he's up there, Mr. Taylor went on, grinning, probably planning the ultimate prank on Jeremy. Something inside me snapped. My whole body shook with rage. Audrey must have felt it because she looked up at me, her eyes wide with worry. After the service, while people gathered for the reception, I walked straight up to the Taylors. My voice was low, but every word was sharp. "How dare you?" I said, glaring at them. "How dare you turn my husband's funeral into a joke?" "Oh, Maud," Mrs. Taylor said, reaching for my arm. Jack would have appreciated the humor. He always did. I pulled my arm away.
No, he tolerated it.
"What you do is cruel and thoughtless. I never want to see any of you again. You're not welcome in our lives anymore. Audrey and I are done with you." "But we're family," Mrs. Taylor protested, her expression finally showing concern. "No," I said firmly. "We're not. Family doesn't humiliate each other. Family doesn't ruin weddings or mock funerals. We're done." I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there, confused and likely still wondering what they'd done wrong. They'd never understood, and I knew they never would. 6 years passed in a blur. Audrey grew from a heartbroken 8-year-old into a thoughtful 13-year-old with her father's kind eyes and gentle spirit. I threw myself into being both a mom and a dad, trying my best to fill the empty space Jack left in our lives. We'd occasionally hear bits and pieces about the Taylors through the grapevine. Etienne had 2 kids now. I'd seen photos of 2 little boys with his mischievous grin on social media, but I always scrolled past quickly. I was determined to keep that part of our lives closed. Sometimes, Audrey would ask about them, especially during holidays or when her friends talked about their grandparents. I never told her about the exploding wedding cake or the funeral jokes. She already had enough to deal with, losing her dad. Adding those stories wouldn't help. Then, for days before Christmas, the phone rang. "Maud," Mrs. Taylor's voice said. It sounded older, softer somehow. "Please don't hang up." I almost did anyway, but Audrey was sitting next to me on the couch working on her homework. She looked up curious. "We miss Audrey," Mrs. Taylor continued, her voice shaky. "And you? Please, would you consider spending Christmas with us? The whole family will be here, Etienne, Caroline, their boys. We'd love to see you both." I started to say no, but Audrey, who must have figured out who was calling, began nodding eagerly. Her eyes were pleading. "There will be absolutely no pranks," I said firmly into the phone. "No jokes, no tricks, nothing like that. Just a normal Christmas dinner. We promise," Mr. Taylor's voice chimed in. They must have been on speakerphone. "We swear on Jack's memory, no pranks." Maybe it was the mention of Jack, or maybe it was Audrey's hopeful face, but I found myself agreeing. "We'll come," I said. "But I mean it about the pranks." After hanging up, Audrey and I went shopping. If we were going to do this, we were going to do it right. We picked out top-of-the-line kitchen appliances for the Taylors, the latest tablet for Etienne and Caroline, and the season's most popular toys for their boys. "Do you think Grandma and Grandpa got me something nice?" Audrey asked as we wrapped the gifts. "I'm sure they did, sweetheart," I said, hoping I wasn't lying. They've had 6 years to think about it. Audrey threw herself into picking wrapping paper and writing cards. Watching her excitement grow, I prayed I wasn't making a huge mistake by letting the Taylors back into our lives. When we arrived at the Taylor house, it looked exactly the same as I remembered. I remember the house, decorated with twinkling Christmas lights and a wreath on the door. It looked warm and festive. Audrey squeezed my hand as we walked up the path, our arms full of carefully wrapped gifts. When we arrived, Etienne and his family were already there. His wife, Caroline, gave me a warm, almost apologetic smile as she helped us with our coats. Their two boys, Ben and Brandon, hovered shyly behind their parents. The gift-giving started off well. Audrey and I handed out our presents, and everyone's reaction seemed genuine. Mrs. Taylor teared up over the fancy coffee maker. Mr. Taylor was thrilled with his new tablet, and the boys' faces lit up when they unwrapped their gaming consoles. Then it was our turn. Mrs. Taylor handed Audrey a neatly wrapped box with a big smile, while Mr. Taylor passed me a similar one. Audrey's fingers trembled slightly as she opened her first gift from her grandparents in 6 years. I'll never forget the look on her face when she saw what was inside. It was a plastic toy that looked like dog poop, along with a few cheap items clearly marked down from a clearance bin. Audrey's lower lip quivered as she stared at the box. The laughter started immediately. Mr. Taylor and Etienne were practically falling over themselves laughing. Even the boys joined in, pointing at Audrey's stunned expression. "Oh my God, look at their faces." Etienne gasped between laughs. "Priceless." I opened my own box, only to find similar junk, expired candy, and random items still covered in clearance stickers. "That's enough," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Where are the real presents?" Mrs. Taylor wiped tears of laughter from her eyes. "What do you mean?" "Those are the presents." "You can't be serious," I said, looking at each of them. "You haven't seen your granddaughter in 6 years, and you give her fake dog poop as a Christmas present." They exchanged confused glances. "It's funny," Mr. Taylor insisted. "Come on, Maud. Learn to take a joke." I looked at Audrey, watching a single tear roll down her cheek, and something inside me broke. Without a word, I stood up and walked over to Ben and Brandon. "I'm sorry, boys," I said, taking back the gaming consoles we'd given them. "But these are going back to the store." "Mom, no," they wailed as I carried the boxes away. I moved on to Etienne and Caroline, collecting the tablet and the other gifts we had given them. "Maud, this is cruel," Mrs. Taylor protested as I took back their presents too. "Cruel," I snapped, turning to face her. "You gave a 13-year-old girl who lost her father fake dog poop for Christmas, and you're calling me cruel?" "It was just a joke," Etienne started, but I cut him off. "We're leaving." "Audrey," I said firmly, "get your coat." The drive home was quiet. Audrey stared out the window, clutching her empty gift bag. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," I finally said. "I really thought they had changed." "It's okay, Mom," she replied softly. "Can we watch Christmas movies and make hot chocolate when we get home?" "Of course we can," I said, my heart breaking for her. "We'll have our own Christmas, just the two of us." And that's exactly what we did. We spent the rest of the day in our pajamas, watching holiday movies, baking cookies, and trying to forget about the Taylors and their twisted sense of humor. The day after Christmas, I was scrolling through Facebook when I saw a post from Etienne. "Terrible Christmas yesterday. My sister-in-law showed her true colors, cruelly taking back Christmas presents from my crying children. Some people just don't understand family traditions and humor." My poor boys were heartbroken. "Worst Christmas ever." The comments poured in almost immediately. "How horrible. What kind of person takes gifts from children? She sounds so toxic." My hands shook as I typed my response. "Let me tell you what really happened yesterday," I began. "You want to talk about cruel? Let me explain your so-called family traditions. After 6 years of no contact, your parents gave their only granddaughter, a 13-year-old girl who lost her father, a toy designed to look like dog poop as a Christmas present. They gave me clearance bin items with the price tag still attached. Then they laughed at our pain. But this is a new behavior. Let's talk about my wedding, where they rigged the wedding cake to explode in my face. Or my husband's funeral, where they turned their son's eulogy into a comedy routine about childhood pranks. You want to talk about toxic family traditions? Let's talk." I hit post and closed my laptop, feeling a mix of anger and relief. Some people would never understand, but at least the truth was out there now. I hit post and waited. Within minutes, other relatives started sharing their stories. "Oh God, remember cousin Jenna's graduation? They swapped her diploma with a fake certificate during the photo op," one person wrote. "They put laxatives in the punch at my baby shower," added another. "They ruined my son's bar mitzvah with that stupid disappearing trick tour," someone else chimed in. The tide quickly turned. Soon, Etienne's original post was flooded with people sharing their own experiences with the Taylors' so-called pranks. Even Caroline, Etienne's wife, liked several of the comments. The phone calls started that evening.
First, it was Etienne.
"Maud," he said, his voice hesitant. "I never thought about it like that. Reading everyone's stories, God, we've been awful, haven't we?" Later, Mr. and Mrs. Taylor called. "We never meant to hurt anyone," Mrs. Taylor said, her voice shaky. "We thought everyone was laughing with us. We thought it was all in good fun. We've always been this way," Mr. Taylor added. It's how we show love. But maybe we've been showing it wrong." I took a deep breath. "You need to understand. Your pranks aren't funny. They're cruel. They hurt people. They hurt your granddaughter." "We see that now," Mrs. Taylor whispered. "Can you ever forgive us?" "I don't know," I replied honestly. "I'm glad you're finally realizing how your behavior affects others, but I can't just forget everything that's happened." 3 days later, a delivery truck brought a large package to our door. Inside was the latest iPhone, the exact one Audrey had been dreaming about, along with a heartfelt letter of apology from her grandparents. I sent Etienne's boys their gaming consoles back with a note. "Everyone deserves a real Christmas." 7 months later, we have a cautious peace. We meet occasionally for coffee or lunch in neutral places. The Taylors are trying, really trying to change. No more pranks. No more cruel jokes. Audrey video chats with her cousin sometimes, and I've seen real remorse in my in-laws' eyes. I think Jack would be proud of this progress. He always hoped his family would understand someday. Maybe, finally, they do.